Just wanted to give you guys a lecture for chapter 14, plant physiology. Hope you guys are doing well. So let's jump right into it. First of all, the objectives that we hope to obtain by the end of this. These are our learning objectives. First of all, to explain the transpiration cohesion theory. Secondly, to define the vocabulary from the chapter. One quick note is that in terms of definition, it's very difficult for me to assess you on whether or not you've learned these vocabulary through the online quiz or test, because of course you can look at the answers, but it's something that you guys should be aware of whether or not you know it. Sometimes I do compare and contrast to see if you understand the differences between two words that are similar. So thirdly, to identify various plant tropisms, plant growth adaptations, parts of the flower, parts of the seed, and parts of the fruit. And lastly, to explain the process of pollination, fertilization, and germination. All right, so those are our objectives, and let's jump right into it. Plants and water, photosynthesis. We've already gone over photosynthesis, and remember that was probably one of the harder chapters or harder parts of this class, as I mentioned. So you're not going to have to do that essay again until the end, until your final exam. But understand that in photosynthesis, this is the plant taking sunlight, turning it into energy, using that energy to turn water, carbon dioxide, and that energy into glucose, which is produces 6 molecules of water. You can get 6 molecules of glucose broken down into hydrogen ions and electrons. All right. Now, a term turgor, it's very important to understand what this word means. And this is kind of like if you see plants that are wilted. Wilted means that like they have no water, they look like they're dying. If a plant gets watered, right, it will gain turgor pressure. All right. So turgor is the presence of water in the plant. So when a plant is wilted, many times people say, oh, it needs water, so they water it. And if the plant responds to that, then that was right. But sometimes plants won't respond to water, meaning that there's plenty of water in the plant, but the plant might have a disease or something. All right. Hydrolysis is to break down organic molecules by combining them with water molecules. And circulation, to dissolve organic molecules and minerals that a plant needs in water, but also to transport those minerals and molecules throughout the plant. All right, so let's talk about plant transportation. I'm going to quickly jump into our book, and you can see 14A1, plants and water, talking about different water in the soil, different soil. Very important to understand the difference between loam, topsoil, and humus. These are different things, right? Loam is a mixture of sand, silt, and clay, okay? Topsoil is composed of loam, right? Living organisms like worms and stuff, and then humus, dead organic matter, meaning decomposing organisms, okay? So it's very important to understand each of those, what's different about them. Loam, remember, is sand, silt, and clay. Topsoil is loam, living organisms, and humus is dead or decomposing organic matter, all right? Also, to understand the use of water for plants, we got photosynthesis, right? Water is used in their turgor to keep that turgor pressure. Hydrolysis, water is used to break down these things, and water is also used for circulation, as we just talked about in the lecture. Okay, but to understand how water is circulated through the plants, this was our question that you guys were supposed to answer. So hopefully you already answered it. If you didn't, you need to do so. Unfortunately, I'm giving you the answer right now. So to start with, water in the roots, right? Water can come from the leaf or down in the soil. Generally, it comes from the roots. We get root pressure, which just means that there's water. The pressure of water outside the root is more than the pressure inside the root. So therefore, the water is forced inside of the veins of the root. Okay, and then you have this term called capillarity. All right. So capillarity, here's the water and minerals in the soil, and it's forced into the roots, okay? And so here's just a quick little explanation of this process. And so that water then goes up into the leaves where light energy converts it into sugar, right? That sugar is transported, that sugar is transported to the fruit. Carbon dioxide enters the leaves, and that is glucose or sugar. All right, and then oxygen is released into the atmosphere. Okay, that is like the process of what's happening in photosynthesis, but it's also important to understand, this other process called the transpiration cohesion theory. Okay, and capillarity has a great part of that. Capillarity is like if you ever went to the doctor and you were getting your blood taken, you might get your finger pricked and they have a tiny little tube that they put over the blood, and the blood climbs the tube, or it shoots up into the tube. Why is that? Because in a small tube, the water will climb the sides because of what's called adhesion, climb the sides of the tube, and it will also hold on to itself, which is called cohesion. Okay? So, together, all of this happening, scientists have created this theory known as the transpiration cohesion theory. And now it's very important to understand and to be able to explain yourselves. Okay? Just before we do, let's look. This is an example of what plants do depending on their turgor pressure. If there's a lot of water, right, the plant will remain open, and so it looks healthy because there's lots of water. It creates a broad space for the water to sit on, like a bowl. But if there's a little bit of water, the plant has to fold up like this so that the water can then get into the xylem, or the plant's vascular system. Okay? And so these leaves will change based on the amount of water. Okay? So we talked about these things: soil texture, loam, topsoil, humus. Okay, you should know those definitions. Very important. There's a picture of loam, right? You've got sand, silt, and clay. Okay? So as we get into transportation of water, right, that root pressure builds up in the vascular cylinder. Capillarity allows a liquid to move up a tube due to adhesion, attraction to other objects. Okay? And then transpiration, right? This is like transpire, or for humans it would be like perspiration, you might think of. And this is where plants release water vapor into the air through their leaves. Remember when we learned about leaves in our last chapter, chapter 13? The stoma is that little hole in the leaf, okay, where gases are either released or not released, okay? And so I want you to understand this. As the water molecules are released from the stoma out of the leaf, okay, they are connected to the other water molecules. What does that mean? Cohesion is a property of water molecules to stick together. Like when you fill up a glass of water and you fill it past the top of the glass, you might see like a little bubble at the top of the glass, okay? That is cohesion, okay? And that is the water molecules that are sticking together. Now, if you pour too much water, then it spills out because the strength of gravity is greater than the cohesion because there's too much weight of extra water in that cup. So I want you guys to think about this. As the water transpires or leaves the leaves, okay, leaves the leaves, meaning it exits the leaves, all right, the cohesion property of water causes that water that left the leaf to, if you will, attract to the water that is still in the leaf, therefore pulling the water up through the plant. So the transpiration cohesion theory is that as water evaporates from the leaves, it attracts other water molecules, pulling them upward through the plant, all right? And you can see that in this picture, okay, whereas the water enters the roots, okay, here's that root pressure, okay, water enters the roots, okay, and it starts to move up the xylem, maybe through capillarity, okay, but that only works for up to about 4 feet, okay. Water can't move much higher than 4 feet, but as cohesion and adhesion in the xylem work together, okay, these water molecules are attracted to each other. Now, they wouldn't have anywhere to go, but up here at the top, here's the stoma. These water molecules are released. They're used in photosynthesis in the leaf, and then they're released into the atmosphere, okay, these little water particles, okay? As they're released in the atmosphere, they're pulling more water, which pulls more water, which pulls more water, and there's the pressure, kind of like if you were sucking on the end of a straw, okay, the sucking happens here, and here's the bottom of the straw, and so the water is pulled up through the plant into the leaf, providing new fresh water as the plant needs it. Okay, so it's very important to understand and be able to explain that this theory, the transpiration cohesion theory. This is one of our learning objectives. So you go over that. Here's another picture of it showing you that water enters the roots in the soil, goes up through the xylem into the leaves, and then is exited out. And there's like a little explanation pulling the water out of the xylem cells. Okay, another picture of transpiration cohesion theory. Remember, whichever one works best for you, stick with that. You don't have to know all these different pictures, but you do need to understand as the water exits the stoma, it pulls water through the xylem, okay, because of capillarity, adhesion, and cohesion, okay, and that causes root pressure, which pulls more water in from the roots, okay. So turgor pressure and wilter, we went over turgor pressure, okay. A new term that we're going to talk about is nastic movements. All right, this is the result of a gain or loss in stiffness of a plant. Okay, so like if something touched a plant that was hot or something like that, and it might pull some of its water, it might be a rapid loss of turgor pressure, so the plant might, wilt away from that object. Okay, nastic movements. This is gradual movements as a result to the cycle of light and darkness. For example, some plants, and you can see in your book, some plants right here, in the afternoon they close, and in the morning they open. That's why they're called morning glories. Okay, so that right there would be a nastic movement. Here's another thigmonastic movement, right? Where as this pencil is close, left close to the plant kind of shies and shrivels away from it. Okay, so it's moving because of touch. All right, here's a picture of the transportation of carbohydrates. Okay, so we talked about the transportation of water. This is the transportation of carbohydrates. Okay, and this is the movement of carbohydrates throughout the plant. So once carbohydrates, that is sugars, right? Carbohydrates are sugars. Remember we learned carbohydrate, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Sugar is C6H12O6, and we're talking about moving the carbohydrates from the leaf maybe to a fruit or to other parts of the plant to provide energy, okay? Stored energy. Now I want you guys to understand this is, there's two very important terms that you need to understand. You have the source and the sink, right? The source would be the leaf, in the leaf where the carbohydrate is manufactured in photosynthesis. The sink is then where the carbohydrate is either used or stored, okay? So the pressure flow model says that carbohydrates are transported from the source into the phloem. As the concentration of carbohydrates increases, water from the adjacent xylem moves into the phloem through osmosis. This increases the pressure, causing the water to move away from the source. Once at the sink, the carbs are moved and pressure is removed, causing the water to move away from the sink. So this is like this constant process of moving. Let's go back to a picture of the inside. Let's see if we can get the xylem and the phloem. Okay, so you might have water in the xylem, okay, move into the phloem, pushing the carbohydrate down from the leaves. Okay, another purpose of water in the plant. Okay, so you can see when the central vacuole, this is our plant cell, right? We did our plant cell projects. That's that central vacuole. When it's full, the plant looks perky. When it's empty, the plant looks wilted. Okay, so it's very important to understand that. Minerals in the soil. All right, fertilizer is minerals that can be added to the soil which contain a percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These help plants, okay? Mulch is what we call decomposing organic matter. Mulch and fertilizer both smell, but many times mulch smells much worse. If you go by a farmland, you might be like, oh my gosh, what is that smell? That is decomposing organic matter, all right? Some plants are what we call heterotrophic. Most, if not all, plants are autotrophic, which means they can produce their own food through photosynthesis. But some plants are also heterotrophic, meaning that they can kill or eat other organisms, right, such as insects. The Venus flytrap, for example, here's a picture of the Venus flytrap. A fly might go in, and once the fly, touches like a little ticker, the flytrap will close, and it will stay closed for a long time, and the needles will, if you will, kill the insect, and it will remain closed until the insect dies, and then it will open up, and that insect will have its, nutrients sucked out of it, and the plant will use it to grow. This right here is what's called a pitcher plant. A plant might go in, and there's like a sticky water in there and get stuck, and the plant will close, and the insect will decompose inside of that liquid and that fluid, and the plant will use that for nutrients. All right. Moving on to plant hormones. These are very cool, but they're also very specific and sometimes can be hard to remember. For lucky you guys, it might be difficult for me to test you on these in a manner that is not too easy to just answer from the lecture. But it's very important to go over this. A hormone is anything that's produced by one area of an organism and then sent to another, right? So our human bodies, we produce hormones, and then they're sent to other parts. A lot of chronic illnesses are due to a lack or overproduction of a hormone. Okay, so let's go. First of all, auxins, they promote cell growth, right? When a fruit is growing on a tree, that auxin also prevents the fruit from dropping, right? And it's also important in tropisms, which we're about to talk about. Secondly, gibberellins. These promote cell elongation, right? So kind of like the maturing or the growing cells, okay? They also, this hormone also works in flower and fruit development, okay? So as the fruit is growing and developing from a small little fruit into a larger one, I'll post some pictures of the fruits in my backyard. Maybe you guys will get some pleasure in understanding, early fruits or fruits that are later along. Cytokinins, these promote cell division, also lateral bud growth. Okay, this is like in springtime when you start to see buds. Okay, moving off of the main branch, that's a lateral bud growth. Ethylene promotes fruit ripening and abscission. What is abscission? Well, when the fruit is ripe and it's ready to drop, once ethylene levels are high enough, then it will separate from the branch, and that's like where the end of the stem is, okay? Abscisic acid promotes dormancy, stomata closure, and inhibits other hormones. So when you're done with the ethylene and it doesn't need it anymore, abscisic acid will stop that other hormone from doing anything, okay? Moving on to tropisms. Tropisms are just growths in responses to different stimuluses, okay? So a phototropism, photo meaning light, is a growth in response to light. So you can see, like a plant that doesn't get any light in one area, it might grow in a weird, funky way in order to obtain that light, okay? We have a hedge in our, in our driveway that I had to cut, and it was because the hedge was growing, like horizontally sideways, which, it had a big trunk, but it was kind of unsafe because it was growing so far to the side, trying to get to its light. Okay. Another one is gravitropism. Plants will grow opposite to gravity. Okay, and you'll see some pictures in a second about that. Thigmotropism, a growth in response to contact with an object. For example, like a vine will attach itself to a fence or something, and it will grow along that fence because of a thigmotropism. And chemotropism is a growth in response toward or away from chemicals. Okay, so let's look at some of this. There's thigmotropism, right? One of my favorite fruits. Passion fruit is, passion fruit vine. It produces, these little tendrils, which we learned about last chapter, which will attach to stuff and pull the plant towards that place of contact. That's a thigmotropism, right? Thermotropism, weird changes in terms of heat, okay? You also have gravitropism. This plant held upside down turns like this because it wants to grow against gravity. This one turns like this. So if you want to do something really cool, get a little seed of a fast-growing plant like whatever you might find, like a tomato or something like this. This kind of looks like tomato, and put it like this, and then flip it the other way around, and then you'll have a plant that does maybe like an S branch, up its way. And so, cool ways you can play with tropisms. All right. One thing about plants is, if they don't get sunlight, they'll just keep growing up and up and up before they produce leaves and stuff like that until they can reach the sunlight. Okay, assuming that they don't run out of energy or root length before they do. This is called etiolated, meaning they have long stems, little leaves because they're not given enough light. At my old house, there was the house was 2 stories, and we had an orange tree in the backyard. But the problem was the orange tree didn't get any light from the big trees on either side of it, so the orange tree grew really, really high, okay? And then it, had a big, tall bush at the top. The problem with that was you couldn't get to the oranges unless you were climbing on the roof of the house, and the oranges would get ripe, and then they would get rotten, and then they would drop like little bombs on our deck and make a huge mess. So we had to have the orange tree cut down, which was sad, but it was just not really feasible, not logical. So photoperiodism, this is very important. The effect that length of a day and night play on the flowering of a plant. So plants, based upon how long the night is and how long the day is, will determine the season, okay? Because as, hopefully you guys know, in summer the days are longer, in winter the days are shorter, okay? And so as the days begin to get longer and longer, plants realize, that there's what's called a critical dark period. It's the requirement of uninterrupted darkness as a means of flowering. So once plants have that critical time, okay, they will flower, all right? Dormancy is the period of inactivity for plants, right? So grass in the winter, when it gets really cold, you can see grass where it looks like brown. Sometimes the grass has just gone dormant, okay? So it's inactive. It's not doing photosynthesis and everything like that. It's like hibernating, okay? Here's pictures of etiolated plants, right? You have 0% etiolated. This is how the plant would look normally, okay? Again, you have different variations of plants, okay? Different season variations, no different season variation. Health variations, right? No health variations. But age variation, as the plant gets older, okay, the etiolated plant, which should look like this, very bushy when it gets older, the stem just grows up, 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 and it has its leaves all up at the top trying to get that sunlight. Okay, so that's etiolated. Different types of plant reproduction. There's vegetative reproduction and sexual reproduction. Vegetative is what we call asexual, meaning that the offspring will have the same genetic makeup as the parent. Okay, the plantlet would be a small complete plant formed by the parent plant. For example, if you take a piece off of a succulent plant, sometimes you can plant the branch of the succulent into the soil and a new succulent will grow. So my sister, she was starting a little business where she was making, cool succulent, formation, little plants and pots and stuff like this. And so she wanted to grow her own succulents instead of, have to buy each one from the store, make her cost go down. So what did she do? She took the leaves, just the tiny little leaves of all her succulent plants, and she put them in their own little soil, and they all started growing new plants. But this right here is what we call asexual reproduction, meaning the plant will have the same genetic makeup. There was no male and female form that got together. Okay, so here's some vegetative reproduction examples. For example, layering. The parent is cut open, bent, and buried underground. Okay, so you have another plant that grows and has roots that grow down from the same plant. Okay, stem cutting. The stem is cut and placed in water or such. Maybe you also, other succulents, you can cut a piece of the stem, you put it in a glass of water, and you can actually see the water grow. Okay, we've done this many times. It works. Not every plant can do this, but certain plants can. Leaf cutting. Leaf rooting in the water, soil, or moist. I just told you about leaf cutting. My sister, she would take a leaf of a succulent and put it in the soil. Tissue culturing, forcing a single cell to differentiate into all the cells needed in the plant. All right, so this is very scientific. going in and studying the plant in terms of its genetics, differentiating the cells. All right. Lastly, something that happens very common, grafting, a process in which a stem is cut from off the plant and placed in contact with the stem of a rooted plant. Thus, the stem begins to grow from the rooted plant. Okay, so the scion is the stem cut for grafting. The stalk is the rooted stem in a graft. Okay, so it's very important to understand how this works. For example, you could have a avocado tree, cut off one of the branches, and put a branch of an orange tree, and now you have an avocado tree that produces both avocados and oranges. Pretty cool. But one thing you have to understand is every avocado tree, if it's going to produce fruit, it either has to be nearby an avocado tree of the opposite sex, or the avocado tree has to be both male and female. How is that possible? The only way is when the avocado tree is young, they cut a branch of it and they take a female avocado tree, or vice versa, a male avocado tree, and they graft it onto the female avocado tree so that when it grows, it has both male and female parts, okay, so that it can pollinate itself. All right, budding is like grafting, but the bark is used instead of the stem. Okay, so talking about a flower, the parts of a flower, we have the pedicel, the receptacle, the sepal, and the petal. All right, pedicel is the stalk that supports the flower. The receptacle is the enlarged part of the pedicel that holds the remainder of the flower. The sepal is the outermost ring of the flower, and the petal, of course, they're the bright colored, what we look at, the pretty part. Okay, male reproductive parts of the flower, you have the stamen, which is the whole male reproductive structure. The filament is the stalk, or what holds it, right? The anther is at the tip, right? This has the pollen grains, which are the male reproductive gametes, okay? The female parts are the pistil, which is the whole structure of the female reproductive part. The stigma, which is the uppermost tip of the pistil. The style is like the stalk that supports it. And at the bottom of it is the ovary, which holds the ovules, which are the seeds, okay, or the ovum, right? Remember we talked about oogenesis in meiosis, the production of ovum. Well, in a plant, that's where it happens, in the ovule, right? Here's a picture of a flower. You have the pistil, or the female reproductive parts, the male reproductive parts, the stamen, which is anther and filament, okay? And then here you have at the bottom the support for the flower, okay? Here's a picture of the flower. You should be able to diagram each of these, right? So you've got 1, you've got the stigma, 2, the style, 3, the ovary, right? 10 would be the ovule, where the ovum is. 4 is the pistil, okay? 5 is the anther. 6 is the filament. 7 is the stamen, so the whole male reproductive parts. 8 is the petal. 9 is the sepal, and 11 is actually the, you could say, the pedicel, or the peduncle. Okay, so here you have the pedicel, the receptacle underneath that, the sepal is the little green part underneath that, and the rest of the parts of the flower, and another one, just so that you guys can see it in different ways, so that whatever your test has, you'll be able to know which is which, okay? And as we continue towards the end of our lecture, the transfer of genetic info, pollination, the process by which pollen is transferred from the anther to the stigma. So this is like a fly or a bee touches the pollen, right, on the anther, and then it has to fly up here and land on the stigma, and that is what we call pollination. So the plant was then pollinated. Every fruit that you see has been pollinated. Okay? Pollen tube. After the pollen lands on the stigma, this little pollen tube, right, is here so that the pollen can go down this tube and fertilize the ovum. Okay? The endosperm is in the seed. It provides food for the embryonic plant. The seed, you have the hypocotyl, where the cotyledons attach. The epicotyl has one or two completely formed leaves, and the radicle is the end of the hypocotyl, which will become the root of the plant. Okay, so here's pollination. Self-pollination is when the same plant touches here. Okay, cross-pollination is when you have this plant, going here, and this plant going here. Okay, so you have self-pollination and cross-pollination. And when we talked about genetics, we talked about Mendelian, Gregory Mendel. He was able to create the right plant that he wanted, that had the right genotype, and then he was able to do self-pollination with that plant to continually reproduce the same type of plant. Here's the seed, right? You've got the endosperm, which is the food for the embryonic plant. You've got the hypocotyl, right? This is those formed leaves. Okay, it doesn't look very detailed, but and the cotyledons, right? You've got the radicle here, which will be the roots. Okay, so it's very important to understand the different parts of the seed, right? So this would be more like what you'll have on a test. You got the seed coat. You've got the I believe that's the hypocotyl, right? The leaf. Okay. Oh, sorry. Hypocotyl. You have, where the leaf is, and then the radicle where the roots are. Okay. Cotyledon. This will be the food for the plant while it's an embryo. Okay. Another picture. You've got the radicle, the root, the epicotyl, the little leaf. The cotyledon is food storage, and you've got the seed coat. Okay, very important to understand different parts of the seed. So we talked about pollination. Pollination is where the anther of a plant lands on the stigma, and it is therefore then pollinated. Fertilization would be the part where this anther moves down here and it fertilizes the ovule. Okay, once it's fertilized, that will begin to develop into a fruit. Okay, so moving forward, we talked about pollination, and then fertilization, and then lastly, germination is the beginning growth of the embryonic plant. That means, let's say a fruit is fully formed, it falls from the tree into the ground. Inside the fruit are seeds, so that seed may or may not germinate. Okay, if it germinates, that is the beginning growth of the embryonic plant. Okay. It will only germinate if the conditions are viable. What does that mean? It needs the proper moisture, temperature, and oxygen. Plants do not need sunlight in order to germinate. Okay, they are under the ground, so they do not need sunlight. Okay, it's a very common misconception. All right, fruit is a mature ovary with seeds inside. Here is a fruit, and as we end our lecture, to be able to understand the different parts of the fruit, you've got the seed in the middle. Okay, you've got endocarp, the mesocarp, and the exo. Right? Remember, endo means in, like we did endothermic, heat is within or absorbed. Exo meaning exit or outside. So you've got the endocarp, the exocarp, so just remember meso in the middle, mesocarp. All right, together, all three of them, they make the pericarp. Okay, so that's the fruits. That's looks like a peach. But that is chapter 14. We'll have a quick write for you guys to answer. Just quickly want to move into, slide through the book. Understanding, plants that catch insects. These are insectivorous plants. Okay, you've got the plant hormones, auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins, ethylene, and abscisic acid, and then they go into it and explain it. You're supposed to have read all this. Also tropisms, you've got the phototropism, got some pictures here, gravitropism, you've also got thigmotropism, chemotropism, there's some tropisms right there. Plants and light, right, the intensity of light, photoperiodism. Okay, you've got different looks of what a long day and a short day look like, right? You've got the critical dark period right here, okay, for a plant to flower, okay, and then plant reproduction, you've got vegetative reproduction, all the different types, as I explained, stem cutting, tissue culturing, grafting, budding, okay, sexual reproduction, and then we jump into the flower, which we just went through, all the different parts of the flower, okay, then you've got pollination, okay, you've got fertilization, okay, the union of the gametes, all right, that which produces seeds. There's germination once the seed falls into the ground. You've got germination, and there's your example, your breakdowns of the seed. Okay, and so you can see as the seed grows, what's happening. There's a dicot and a monocot. Okay, the differences between the two, how they look. Okay, how seeds are dispersed, right, through wind, through plants, through animals. All right, fruit. Okay, different types of classifications of fruits. Okay, you don't need to know all these, but it's just interesting to see it all, the different types of fruits that we like and eat. Full of sugar, okay, which is why vegetables are better for you than fruits. Okay, so there's the chapter. At the end of it, you can see the self-quiz answer key, right? So if you wanted to look at the chapter, we are in chapter 13 and 14. You can see the self-quizzes if you wanted to go through and you wanted to test yourself on the chapter 14 self-quizzes, you can right there. Okay? Again, I hope you guys are all doing well, and we're going to leave it at that. Have a good time. I'll be posting your homework after this. Thank you.